Carl, do you remember when you were just a little tyke? I don't know what a little tyke is. It's maybe anywhere between 8 and 12, maybe, although that's getting pretty close to a teenager.
Yeah.
But we used to try to track down places where we could feel safe and secure and in a way almost hunker down in space that we call our own. In my case, I remember we had this huge willow tree in the backyard, so weeping willow. So when it was blossoming or as a bloom, parts of it you couldn't really see through very well, and it had the trunk that came up, and then it had 3 or 4 pretty significant sized branches that came off, and I built myself a tree fort right in the kind of safety and security of all those branches. It wasn't too far off the ground, but it was enough off the ground that I had to build little steps to get up there, and then put plywood down, and then put rails around it, and then a little like tarp roof over it. Aww. And then I could go up there. I would bring books up there, or I would we didn't have phones with internet and Audible to listen to books or any of that stuff. So I would just get up there and just have my little safe space that I felt good about. And then the world kind of was just quiet and closed down all around me, and I felt really secure and safe. Well, that's a space that we find, or I found, but there's also, it's less likely in the world at this age that I'm going to be building tree houses in the backyard and going there. Although we go to the beaches, we find these places that we really love. Yeah. But most importantly is that we surround ourselves with people that we would consider as safe. In the community that we walk in, it's important.
Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast, where our goal is to engage with all of those willing to venture deeper into their transformational journey with Christ. Here are your hosts and the co-founders of Embracing Brokenness Ministries, Steve and Colleen Adams.
In Proverbs 11, this is verse 14, it says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety." Now, the problem then becomes, where do you find the counselors? Okay, there's safety in counselors, but what about safe counselors?
Yeah. And I don't think the Bible was talking about the counselors you pay for.
No. At $200 an hour.
Just to provide clarity.
Right.
It is interesting that each of us has a responsibility to return to the safety, being safe people, just like in the garden before the fall. Because it's interesting that, the first time we see unsafe behavior in what previously was safe relationship is when Adam says to God, "She's the one, Eve's the one," and Eve goes, "The enemy's the one. Say, the serpent told me." And so you're introduced to even some of the beginning pieces of gaslighting, if you will, what we call gaslighting. Yeah. Unsafe behavior started right there from the beginning.
Yeah, blame shifting. That's pretty much unsafe behavior.
Judging, blame shifting, lack of accountability, those kinds of things. And so it started there. So those patterns, have become part of how we've communicated since the days of the garden.
So we have to find a way, and we want to introduce our audience today to the notion that there are people out there that are trustworthy, but we have to take the time to understand if we are those same people that are safe.
Of course.
We have to do our own internal audit to see where we fall in this category of safety, which is great, because what we're going to do is we're going to walk everyone through this sort of exercise that you can even do on your own.
Yes.
But we'll want to define safe and unsafe too. But you have some really interesting things that you'd like to share as we kick this off, and then we'll get into that a little bit more. So tell us about your experiences and what.
Yeah, I would say, why this subject is so important to me is I don't believe that you can truly heal unless you're accompanied by safe people in your life. God has to be safe first and foremost, but you also need people you can trust and that you even understand what you're trusting in. Because for me, for everybody for that matter, we learn from the patterns of other people, especially parents, what happens in families. Those patterns become a part of us. And so we assimilate those patterns, and that's what we look for in other people. Well, there's nothing that says that those patterns were safe. In fact, there is no one who ever walked the earth that was safe except for Jesus, 100%.
Right.
But there are attributes that would tell you people are safer. And I think for me, there were many unsafe attributes that I didn't recognize in my growing up years until I was about 28 years old. And so as a result, relationships for me were very dysfunctional. I wasn't doing what it was to be a safe person. For example, my family was extremely judgmental, and kind of set our family up above everybody just a little bit. And so having that kind of superior attitude and feeling that I could rightfully judge other people's behavior or who their pastor was. I mean, I found myself judging so many things. Right. Well, that's incredibly unsafe. I mean, who is going to come to you relationally with something really heavy on their heart where they have fear that you're just going to judge whatever they're saying?
Right. It's probably on the top of the list. Top of the list, it's easy to identify because in the moment, depending, and now there's a difference between judging whether or not we should be involved in a relationship or with people who are safe. Like there's a part of that, not judging people, but judging the environment or the situation. Pastor of mine used to call being a fruit inspector. So it would be, if you're a Christ follower, you want to associate and be around people who carry the characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit with them. We want to do that as well. So we're not talking about that as much as we're talking about just an attitude. Look at Matthew 7:1, judge not, lest ye be judged, with the same measure. So I think there's a part of understanding how to break this down too into bit smaller pieces. But
yeah, I think that's important, and we're going to do that as we go through, even just a look at what is unsafe. Because so many people have no idea what is safe and what is unsafe. They're just playing out those patterns and not even realizing. I think in my clinical work, the hardest place to see this was in domestic violence situations. And people always ask you, well, why do they go back to a second abuser, a third abuser? Like, how do they keep marrying these people or getting involved with people that keep abusing them? Well, this is the exact reason. They have no idea how to differentiate the traits of someone who is safe or unsafe. And to be honest with you, in my journey of just healing and relearning how to trust that I knew how to pick a safe person, I don't even think until our relationship that I was able to live in a place where I feel so comfortable with what is safe that if unsafe ever presented itself, I would throw it far away.
Right.
And not initially. I mean, it takes you a little while sometimes to ascertain that. But I think, I'm realizing neuroplastically and for a whole bunch of reasons that I have had a reset from my younger years of defining unsafe things or just believing unsafe things could have been safe. And then I got really hurt because they weren't. But there is a time when you start to learn what is safe, and you can trust what I call your knower, that you can pick safe people. It's a beautiful time when you get there, and you put the appropriate boundaries up to protect that. And
as we talk a lot about this subject in some of the teaching series that we do, actually in prison, with inmates, outside of prison, with just anyone in society who we have an opportunity to minister to. We did it for years for those experiencing homelessness. We got all kinds of interesting reactions from this type of conversation. But one of the things that you did always, I appreciate it, because the first time I heard this was like, wow, I had no idea. You had something you referred to as a glass ball that was sort of inside of you, and you tell the story. So I'm going to let you tell it about how we developed this inability to trust other people or to be safe and secure in our own skin, or even judging others that same way.
Yeah.
So good story.
It's a great story, and it takes me back. It's so funny that somebody who was a part of that story was a very safe person for me. So I thought, living out my unhealed patterns, who later became unsafe. But, you know, it was your buddy, my first husband's, and we were just friends. And he had observed that, boy, I had defensive walls up where, you know, nobody could really get through past certain points. I wasn't willing to be open and vulnerable. His observation was I held people at bay.
Gave him the Heisman.
According
to your brother, the Heisman.
Yeah, there you go. And that was really, really true. Like, you could get in so far, men in particular. Women, sometimes I could trust a little bit, but I didn't even totally trust women. So he had observed this, and he was a young Christian, and he was watching me, you know, in the workplace, holding up to some pretty strict standards of, you know, walking out my faith. But this part really perplexed him. And so he asked if we could go out to dinner. So we went out to dinner one night. Thank goodness, drove separate cars. I was like, I get to pay my way. This is not a date. And we're eating dinner, and we get to the end, close to the end of dinner, and he starts to talk to me about the hurt that I've experienced, some very, very deep hurt. He didn't name the hurt. He named the fact that he saw that there was deep hurt that had created in me this pattern of just building these walls and not letting anybody in.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I think I felt somebody notice me in terms of I was really deeply hurt. And family, friends, no one recognized that there was a deep well of pain. And when he spoke that out, you know, and he said, you don't trust people, you know, like, people have become very unsafe. And so you build these walls, other people would just completely isolate. And I was like, that's kind of true. And tears start trickling down my eyes. And he said, let me talk to you about how to understand what a safe person is. He said, you know, most of us have had experiences that cause us to distrust people. And he said, and it starts when you're little. He goes, what I would envision for you is, you know, you're in second grade and you have a crush on a boy. Or no, second grade wasn't the crush on a boy. Second grade, you get your first girlfriend who, you know, is like your bestie. You're out on the playground, and all of a sudden there's a third party involved. So there's 3 girlfriends, and before you know it, your bestie runs off with this other friend, and you're kind of left going, wait a second, like, that really hurt. Well, what he said was, you had given your first bestie, without even thinking about it, this little glass ball that you keep inside of you that is like your most precious, precious things, precious memories, your hopes, your dreams, and you had handed it to this little girl, and she didn't intentionally like drop it and break it, but when she took off with the other little girl, she was careless. It fell out of her hands and it broke. And it hurt you. And you picked up all the little pieces of that glass ball and you glued them back together and you put them back in your heart. And that was the first time you really experienced almost like betrayal and hurt, and even could have, we probably didn't really have much of a context for that. And then you go to 5th grade and you have this crush on somebody who you chased around the playground, and, you know, he had interest in you and you had interest in him.
Which who knows what interest is at 5th grade, but
but you're like
hanging
passing
out.
little
I
love
know.
notes. I know that doesn't exist
right.
now, but
Like
we didn't
Valentine's
have
cards
texts
or
and
something.
things,
Yeah,
and
right.
we'd pass notes, or his friend would tell you that, oh, he kind of likes you, or
Oh, boy.
just all that kind of stuff. And so now you decide you're going to hang out on the playground when he's supposed to be off with his buddies playing kickball or whatever. You two are going to hang out a little bit, and he's going to take you wherever he goes to show you off. And his friends are like, wait a second, do you have a girlfriend? Ew, like that's like gross. And so to prove to the boys that, oh, he doesn't have any girlfriend, that little glass ball that you gave him, he takes it and he slams it against the wall and it shatters down the wall and he walks away from you. And you're like, oh my gosh, did that hurt? Pick up all the little pieces, glue it back together, put it back in. And now you're starting to realize you better be careful of who you give that
The
glass
world is
ball
not a
to.
safe place.
The world is not a safe place. And so slowly and surely, the next person you give it to, put your hands out.
Yeah.
You give it to them, but you kind of hold your hands there for a while to say,
Ah.
are they safe? Are they not safe? And eventually you let them hold it. And whether they slam it against the wall or whether they accidentally drop it, somehow it gets broken again.
Yep.
And each time you're like, instead of letting you hold it, I put it out like a little tease to you.
Right.
Well, maybe in like 5 years if you prove yourself. And eventually that little glass ball is not coming out for anyone. And so it was so interesting. It was the first time somebody had identified in me what I didn't understand, but I knew I was getting tougher and tougher, not letting people in. And I left that dinner in tears. I did not pay my part of the bill because I left the bill and everything and went and got my car and drove away because I was wrecked. And I carried many things inside of me from child sexual abuse and just some incredible hurts that I had never told anybody about. And so it made me start to reckon with the fact that, maybe there was something different if I could learn to trust other people. He told me I would never get through healing unless I could learn to trust other people, which was crazy, when later he became very unsafe. But there was a lot of truth. I mean, it was a good lesson learned.
So it's a great metaphor for life for all of us.
Yeah.
So there's something to carry with you, folks. Just think about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and actually, the glass ball to me, in reading scripture, is when the scripture says, "Don't cast your pearl before swine."
Okay.
It's kind of like, I mean, not that you go around saying everybody's a pig and you're not gonna, but the reality is, this is precious, precious stuff, right? And you've got to be careful with, the essence of who you are. That other people are going to treat it in a safe way. And so it became important to me to start looking for, why are people so unsafe? What is wrong with my knower of who's safe? Why do I pick people that are always takers and I'm such a giver? Why do I have people when I try to express my feelings, they say, oh, you're just too emotional, you're too sensitive. Many, many things that made me crawl further and further into myself.
Well, so we experience this every day in a world that really doesn't care much about anything. And I use the world in the sense of people in the world who care more about their own well-being, their own status in life. And social media is the worst place for unsafe people because you're not even sure that the person is real. Maybe it's a bot, maybe it's something that's created, but a lot of times it's people that you don't have to confront face to face and actually talk through things. You can just sort of throw bombs and lob them in and just run for the hills.
Yep.
Full of unsafe people. And there's also many safe people on there. I'm careful that even in posting things, and I'm not on there that much, but for the ministry, that I'm respectful of people's points of view without attacking them personally. I would never do that.
Yeah.
Even though it might be a misunderstanding or even something anti-Jesus, which I rarely respond to because it's somebody wanted to pick a fight.
Yeah.
But there's ways that we can begin to define what folks look like that we would come across that are unsafe. And maybe there's just almost a little mini radar system, and God's created it in each one of us. Certainly the Holy Spirit can prompt us in any way. But you're right. Earlier things that you said, like we can just establish patterns of behavior that are modeled for us.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden we're jumping into the fray. We're headed into Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Yeah.
We're going to have all kinds of opportunities to head into the fray of arguments and disputes and things of that nature. But let me just tackle this. I'm going to put this up. I'm going to put in the show notes. There'll be a link to these lists so you can have them. But also pop them up on the screen here so folks can see what they are. But let me just walk down. Let me comment on a couple because I'd rather spend a little bit more time on the safe people list and have you walk through that. So let's just look at it. So this would be unsafe folks. This would be people. You could even put in parentheses impossible. That's an
So all credit goes to Cloud and Townsend, who wrote a book called Safe People. They wrote some really good books.
We'll
Boundaries is a phenomenal one.
Yeah.
But so this is a combination list. This isn't their direct list because I took things from different people. But what was interesting is a therapist, I think, had said to one of them that they called unsafe people impossible people. Like if you have that person, you're just like, they're impossible. Like I can't figure out, how to relate to them. I just thought it was a good word. We've always said unsafe, but I do like that kind of impossible.
Well, and these are folks sometimes that are on their way on the outer circle of people that you would hang around with or want to be a part of. What we're hoping to encourage everybody to do here is to narrow the list of people that you can bring into community with you.
Yeah.
Advisors, like I read about, people that care about what you care about, people that care about what Jesus cares about, have a biblical worldview, very small percentage of people that think that way, if that's what you're looking for. If you just want somebody to bounce ideas off, hang out and eat wings, you can find those folks too, but you may not hand them the glass ball. So here we go. Unsafe people. Life is all about them. Very little interest in your life. Okay, so we can all remember discussions when you walk in with people in an environment or a crowd, and you're even in church, and you walk up to them and say, "Hey," and then all of a sudden, boop, 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 like it's just like mind dump.
Got puked all over.
And you're sitting there going, and this is why people don't say, "Well, how you doing?" Or they don't actually answer, but some do, and then all of a sudden you get this. So everybody knows what I'm talking about. These are folks that are just, it's all about them, and then you just don't even know how to respond. Well, some people respond to when there's a breath to make it all about them too. So it's just, okay. Takers always want their own way. So there's takers are people that are always taking, not giving. Okay.
Yeah. The taker to me is the one who you get the text that said, "Hey, do you got a minute?" And you're like, what do they want from me now? That is the perfect definition of a taker, is when you have that feeling.
Hi, Colleen.
Yep.
Yeah. Actions do not match what they say. So this is just, be doers of the word and not hearers only, but also be doing things that you're not actually living out through words, right? So you just have to, words are important, critical. Diminish you. Anybody that's willing to diminish you in public around other people, look, if there's something that you might have done to offend somebody, there's a way to do it. Like for someone that's been offended, it's Matthew 18. If you're not sure, just go read it. It is to go to that person one-on-one and try to make amends. You don't call them out in public, embarrass them, diminish them, put them down. I had a boss that was like that. They thought, and I actually had a coach that was like that. If you would call, and this is for baseball in high school, if you did something wrong, he would publicly humiliate you, even if you make an error in a field, or if I'll never forget, story after story of situations where he would just confront people publicly in some way to humiliate them and think they'd actually play better. I don't get it. I mean, that's a tactic. It's something that coaches do. I doubt very many good coaches approach life that way. Not effective. Another unsafe characteristic, if someone feels they're entitled to a lot of different things.
Well, especially from you personally. Like entitled is to hold title. Like you think about the title of your car. It means I own you, or I own that you should love me, or I own that, and you will often see them get extremely offended and hurt when you don't align with the fact that they're entitled to everything from you.
Well, here's one of my all-time favorites, gaslighters, gaslighting.
So overused anymore.
It's overused. We just had a big election, right?
Yeah.
I think there was gaslighting on both sides of the aisle.
I would say so.
A lot of gaslighting, saying, trying to confuse
fear
people.
In either side.
Trigger
to
you,
the extreme.
right, to try to get a response and then, come back at you with half-truths and untruths. It's bad.
Well, and interesting, the definition, just how I kind of titled gaslighting, make you confused about reality.
There's that. Yeah, like make
they
their own
use a
reality.
lot about perception versus what is actually real.
Okay, we'll let that one go for now. Feel like everything you do is wrong. Makes you question yourself. I'm apologizing for things I didn't even do to try to bring peace into the environment.
Yep.
There's a certain level of codependency sometimes I would show in doing that because I would, and people pleasing, like, I don't want to offend you. Talk about Townsend and Cloud's Boundaries is an amazing book. So we could do a whole podcast on that, on what they said in that book about, creating an environment where you create a safe environment by creating boundaries. You don't allow people to walk all over you and do that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Because then you find yourself isolated and you're not trusting others. So, we could talk a lot about that. Let me just keep going. You defend the unsafe person to others and make excuses. Okay, so that makes you unsafe as well. Because you're trying to make excuses for somebody who's highly critical or maybe offensive to others and like in defense of them. That's not helpful.
Yeah, it's like I can remember with Bob, my first husband, saying something in public about me. And I was so used to, when it wasn't a positive thing, it was a criticism of the way I had done a public speech that I did. And some of my friends were there, and instead of saying what went well, he picked out the two things that were wrong. And my friends were horrified because they thought it was fantastic. And when they later confronted me to say, that, why would he do that? Like, that's not okay. I defended him to say, well, he just wants to see me improve. Like, most people won't tell you those things because they just kind of butter your biscuit and on you go. But like he really wants me to improve. Well, and I had a father who always wanted me to improve and put red all over my school papers and things. So, it again, it was a pattern, but it was very unhealthy, and I just didn't even notice it.
Well, I have a mentor of mine that says, well, he never takes unsolicited advice. That's unsolicited advice. There's a part of that I can understand.
Yeah.
Everybody's a critic.
Yep.
Okay. But if you don't know me well and have enough of a relationship with me, I'm unlikely to take it. I might be gracious, but maybe not to.
Yeah.
But this is somebody that you trusted, and he's now criticizing you. It's to the next point is unequal power, right? Treating you lower than them. So there's in some ways that's a power position. Yep. Psychologically more powerful.
Well, or intellectually.
Intellectually, yeah.
This is really common with spiritual abuse. The intellectual part of the power, people acting that theologically they're spiritually much higher than you, and they probably do know more things from a theology perspective, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they should hold power over you.
We'll get to it, but opposing to that, a safe person would simply meet you where you are.
Absolutely.
And they'd probably ask more questions and have answers and guiding you and directing you and coaching you to truth. Yep. Rather than drilling you because of what you don't know. Yeah. Makes sense?
You're so right.
Minimize your feelings and experiences. You're so sensitive, Colleen. What is your problem? Like, I'm just trying to help you get the ums and the ahs out of your speech.
Well, you do that too.
I know.
But that's actually, that is positive because we both know
Yeah.
that I need
And we
to
could
get the
probably
ums
do
and
that
ahs
by
out.
a snapping a rubber band.
That's how I
list.
broke it 30 years ago.
Yeah,
I just
that's
haven't
okay.
done as much public
I have
speaking.
nothing to say about that right now. All right. They counter you, right? Your memory is incorrect. That didn't really happen. What are you trying to say? No, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Just reinventing the past, reinventing truth, their truth. It's pretty bad.
And this is actually a part of what you see in gaslighting too.
Yeah, that's true.
It's called countering, but it is, you'll see similar patterns in
and
gaslighting.
Stereotyping. You're one of those.
I remember when my father said to me, you're just a bleeding heart. When I would talk about what it would look like for the church to actually love people, instead of just talking about loving people, I'm like, why are we not out in the soup kitchen lines? Like, why does our family say we're Christians and we're not off doing this or that? And my dad would just be like, you're one of those, like those bleeding hearts. And I'm like, I don't know that I'm one of anything, probably one of the Christ followers, because this really bothers me.
Yeah. And that's a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
I used to love it. Not love it. This is sarcastic love. People, my dad would be this way. I think a lot of times, and there was parts of me that would too. I'd see somebody street homeless on the corner, right? And we talk about, and we have plenty of stories about that. The fact that you served in that community for 12 years helped me re-educate myself. But my judgment, and I would not have been safe to anybody there. I was like, come on, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps, get to work, get a job, and get out of the gutter. Okay, that is, I so understand why that is not a practical solution for most people in that situation. I would have been unsafe. All right. Transition.
Okay.
All right, to the opposing list. This is the one we want to encourage people to be looking for, folks, to in their life, or examining your own. Now, so we're going to go both sides of the equation. You could say, well, am I unsafe? There's the list. Okay. I don't know. Ask yourself that question. But it's a process. Okay. So we're not beating anybody up here. We're just bringing to light something that is critically important as we grow in our spiritual formation, as we grow in our relationship with Christ, that we become safe people, and we know how to surround ourselves with people that believe what we do, think how we do, are formed in the same way, that are non the list that we just read and more the positive. So let's go ahead and start on safe people.
Yeah, so you'll see this is a faith-based list. I don't even believe that you can be safe if you're not a Christ follower. And it goes to, we all are coming out of the garden. Our operating system is on the world.
Yeah, but let me stop you. I know plenty of Christians, Christ followers, that aren't safe, though.
Oh, I'm going to go there.
Oh, so it's not that, although I also met some non-Christ followers that seem somewhat safe until.
The concepts that are so important, though, biblically, around forgiveness and for, some of those things, and actually healing, Christ is the only safe healer. And so when we look at some of the attributes, for me personally, I know people will say somebody can be safe if they're not saved.
Oh, sure.
I'm looking for somebody who has picked up the cross to follow Jesus, saying the ways of the kingdom are the right way.
They're a disciple.
And I am changing my operating system from everything that's about the world, because the world system is what's in it for me.
Right.
The kingdom system is how do I serve you? Right. And so for me, that's where I see the distinction. And so for me, as I look at people who proclaim their faith, and what I would call a Christ follower, is it's not okay to just say you're a Christian. You need to understand the brokenness that you have. I think as Barna says it, there's a point in life in your Christian walk to move on to even being able to love God and love others. That means you have to break up with the world, you have to break up with your false self, and you have to break up with sin. And that is part of a healing journey. And so for me, I I would never consider somebody safe unless they're engaging their own healing journey.
Okay.
Like they shouldn't be trying to walk you through yours when they've never gone through their own
Something
kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And the person needs to be loving. And by definition of love, because we've perverted it so much. I mean, we love our car. We love, but the definition of love is more God's love.
Yeah, sacrificial love.
Sacrificial love. And we can, through the power of God, operate in that with his power in us, but we'll never be perfect in it.
No.
But I think the definition is when there is nothing in it for you and you step out to love somebody when there's nothing to gain. Like that's the kind of love we're talking about. Right. And that love encourages me, if I'm in somebody's presence who's safe, I don't have to worry about that person stopping loving me if I tell them something and they're like, oh my goodness, like, wow, I didn't know that about you. And they don't love me anymore. I mean, a love that there's nothing in it for them means that they're going to recognize their own sin too, and they're going to be safe and not stop loving me.
Good.
Yeah. Not judgmental. This is a huge one because, we bit that stupid fruit that told us we could be like God. In other words, equivalent to God, knowing good and evil. We did it through a broken mind that what's in it for me. So our definition of good is what's in it for me good. Right. It's all about me. And bad can be, now you're starting to see good being called bad, because if you step out on what the Bible says, truth, you're targeted as being bad because somebody doesn't like your perspective. And so, so the non-judgmental part just really deals with being safe, that we recognize each other's sin. And, like we've said this so many times, whether it's to people in prison, we don't want to know your records. Like we're not looking things up, because what we do know is that if I put my list up on the wall of all the things I've ever done, and you put your list up of all the things that you've done, including what got you here, we would both not understand necessarily, you did that? Why would you do that? I don't get that, because that's not been my kind of sin. And I would do the same thing to their list. I don't get that. But what we would recognize is we both have a list. Yep. And so we could step in and say the list is common to all human beings. There's not somebody who's arrived because their list is a little bit shorter. Yep. And so I'm not judging. You could tell me anything, and my response is going to be, that may be true of you in the world's eyes. But as a born-again believer, the truth is, it doesn't change your standing with God, because Jesus has covered this. And so I'm not going to judge you or condemn you. I'm going to say, okay, that's true for now. Let's talk about how to walk through this. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to know that you're going to need a loving person to walk with you. And so it's non-judgmental in a very servant-hearted kind of way.
One of the biggest attributes of a safe person.
Yeah.
Has to be near the top of the list.
Yeah.
Loving.
Yes.
Non-judgmental.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Continue.
Empathetic is just somebody who's willing to want to understand, not just to hear and say, oh yeah, that sounds terrible. But who's willing to say, wow, tell me more. Mm-hmm. How did that impact you? What's going on with you? Because quite frankly, if the same thing had happened to me, I'm going to respond to it differently from the lens I see the world, from my past. And so to say, tell me what that means for you. And then I'm really responding to your emotional state, because I can really feel what you're feeling. Maybe not to the same, extent, but that gives somebody the feeling like somebody's really in here with me.
They care. They
yep, we care. Confidence, extremely important, that, they can trust you, that they're going to share something, really deep, and it's not going to end up with 3 other friends.
Right.
Authentic and honest. Our world really suffers from a lack of authenticity, from us wearing these masks for everybody to see, so they can't really see what's going on inside of us.
Yeah.
And so this level of authenticity is like, get the fig leaves off that you put on in the garden.
Exactly.
You know, and be who you really are. And in order to do that, we need to have people, again, who are not judging in things, because the biggest fear and the way the enemy gets at us is through shame, telling us that, wow, you take that fig leaf off and anybody sees that, you're totally going to be rejected.
Yeah, but I've learned over time, and you related this back to our own healing journey, I learned over time that really isn't, it's not about me. So if there are failures in my past, and there are plenty of them, I wrote a whole book about it, which somebody will read maybe sometime in 2025, we'll see.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know, God uses every one of those failures in a way that will ultimately give glory back to him if we surrender to him.
Amen.
So I think when you become a little more aware, if you're authentic yourself, you're looking for that in other people, you're not afraid to put that stuff out there, because it doesn't really matter. You can judge me. You're not. I'm just one of God's kids that's messed up, kind of like everybody else, and I'm really not afraid to share those mess ups, and if in an effort to maybe keep you from doing the same thing, or just to show you what he's done in my own life, which I don't know. There's and one here we were mentioning about humility, and it's humble and not entitled, like we went to the other list, but shows gratitude. There's a gratitude that I have to show when the wounds of my past have been exposed and they've been dealt with in God, even though those things drove me towards some really bad behaviors. So there's gratitude and humility, and there's toward God and others. So I don't know.
But think about where we're at in our healing journeys. We've both been at this for a long time, surrendering constantly. Feels like the next thing comes up and you're like, will we ever get there?
Well, no.
We will. I mean, when we walk the new earth. But
True.
We're certainly a lot further along in understanding and surrendering than we were when we started the journey.
True.
And, you know, back at the beginning of my journey, if anybody would tell me, take your fig leaves off, my goodness, I was a people pleaser. I was so into performing, because all of that is how I secured love, because I didn't really know how to get it from God.
Yeah, same here.
And so it's difficult. But if you can't really think about putting your wounds, the things that hurt you, or even that you did that hurt other people, they're part of your wounds too, putting them in service to the kingdom, to the master story, which is what he asks all of us to do.
Yes.
It is really, really difficult to be authentic. So we'll see different levels of this, you know, of people's ability to, you know, really take the mask off. But you should see peaks in the beginning, and eventually more and more and more. And then, you know, I think for us, we're at the place that, you know, Henry Nouwen called wounded healers, where we're like, yeah, this is our, we just want to get everybody else, you know, to understand they too can be healed. And so we almost brag about our wounds.
Yeah, that's true.
Because,
I guess that's a good point.
Yeah.
So a couple other things. We won't get deeply into this because we talked about it already. Holding boundaries and respecting your boundaries. So that's another safe person, somebody that can do that well. And we just mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
But here's also one that maybe this one belongs at the top of the list after all, which points you to Christ.
Yeah.
And this is the point you were trying to make earlier. The
Yeah.
Christ followers, to start with, the only true healer was Jesus. Like and there's a whole book on my phone, and also in hardback form and softback, that shows us that greater story of healing that's available through Jesus Christ. So if they're not pointing you in that direction, and they're pointing you to Muhammad or Gandhi, or which they said great things, but they're not Jesus, the ultimate healer, or they're pointing you to someone that does not believe that Jesus is the only way, then you have different points of view that kind of leak into the truth, and you get sidelined from it. And now you're not safe because you're not pointing people in the right direction. Does that make sense? So
another way to look at it, or to say it, is if in the garden, before sin, we walk perfectly, authentically and safe with each other, even with our own internal, part of ourself, that we could fully walk in the true self. And then we bit the fruit. Now we're on the other side of it. The antidote to return us to the garden is only Jesus. His sacrifice allows us to enter back in the only place where there can be safety and safe people. So absent him, you might be able to do a lot of synthetic things and be a really, quote, good person by the world's standards, but only through walking through the antidote for our very condition is what makes sense.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. We got a few more, and then we're going to wrap things up. So never allows you to be a victim. Okay.
And let me say something about that. I will tell you that people get very, very frustrated with me, and I don't say it in a non-loving way, but I don't allow people to stay in victim status. And what you can do is to say, we're victors in Christ. Because of Christ, we are victors, and we need to learn how to walk in that. It doesn't mean that we're not in a world at war, that we're not getting hurt, that we're not victims, because we are victims. Right. But the choice to stay in that leads to extreme unhealth. It does not lead to purpose and victory and the things that were promised in the scriptures. And so it's really important to point it out. And, I know people will get upset. Well, we even have somebody who we know from back in our days working with the homeless who says, I was so mad at you because you used to sit me down, and when I was upset about something and I would go off, you would say, you know what, you need to stop being a victim. We've been through this before. Mm-hmm. If you want to stay in that, that's fine, but you're not going to get healthy. And he used to get so angry. And I'll never forget the day that we had the conversation years after, and he said, the best thing you ever did was tell me to not be a victim. I had lived that place for 40 some years of my life. And it ticked me off when you would say it, but then I would realize I am an adult. I need to take responsibility in my relationship with Christ and heal. And he's in a really good space today, and it just cracks me up because there are times where I'm like, man, to tell somebody not to be a victim, it just feels so offensive. But the reality is it's very unhealthy.
We all remember Eeyore. There are people who just walk around with a cloud over and love to be able to sit in that stuff and feel, I don't know how it makes, well, I shouldn't say that because there are times when I did the same thing.
Oh, me
that's
too.
Not exactly where I want to live.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a victim.
Yeah.
So additionally, walks in forgiveness. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by walks in forgiveness?
That you see in struggles that they're going through in their life that they don't allow unforgiveness and a lack of reconciliation. Now, it doesn't mean that immediately when you're offended, I'm not one who goes run over there and, tell somebody they need to ask for your forgiveness, or you don't need to run over while they're still in pain and ask for forgiveness. There has to be, sometimes it takes a minute to just count the cost to really know what it's going to take. If I ask you for forgiveness, it means I am committed to turning away from that behavior and marching a different path, right?
That's good.
So to say, can you forgive me when I'm going to just do it a week from now? That is not what the repentance part of it means. And so I need to make sure that I understand what the cost is going to be of turning away, which means I have to understand what drove me to do something that would hurt you.
Yes.
But seeing somebody willing to process that and to always go back and ask for forgiveness and walking in kind of reconciliation, really, really important.
Also hold space for you and you're a priority to them. Well, that makes sense because you just need available is available.
Yeah.
And if there's something that, and this is, again, it's not everybody, folks. This is not like your neighbor 10 doors down, you only see 3 times a year.
Right.
This would be people that you really want in that sort of inner circle of people that you trust, that you believe in, that have your best, God's as a priority and your best interest at heart. and are able even to speak into that through
Mm-hmm.
through that Christ-centered perspective.
Yeah.
So really important to leave space for that.
Well, and it is, I think when you look at safe people, we've always said you need 3 to 5 safe
Yeah.
people in your life.
You'd be lucky to get a
Most
couple.
people can't count 1 or 2
Yeah, it's hard.
that meet the criteria, but that just means that you've got to do some of the work to change your patterns and start to develop.
Right.
You got to be a safe person, so you need to meet this criteria to expect other people to be it for you.
Right.
Holding space is a very spiritual director kind of word, and I can remember people would say, yeah, I'll hold space for you, and I'm like, what are they talking about?
Yes.
But now I know when one of my dearest friends, like Beth,
Yes.
for example, if
Hi, Beth.
she'll say, Colleen, just know I always hold space for you.
Yeah.
What it means to me is I am one of a few people that if anything happens in my life and I call, she's going to drop everything for
Yep,
me.
there you
That's
go.
holding space. And yeah, you don't do it for everyone, but you have a couple people you're really committed to walking out their journey with them.
And you could pick up the phone at 3 a.m. in crisis and they'd be
Yes,
there.
absolutely.
They'd be
Absolutely.
jumping out of bed and
Yep.
jumping in a car to get there.
Yep.
Also accepts feedback without becoming defensive and
Mm-hmm.
takes interest in things that are important to you.
Yeah.
Really, really important parts of defining safe people. Take feedback without becoming defensive. So if you have input, hopefully it's Christ-centered, biblically based input, and done in a safe way. So that's important, right? It depends on the approach, but also they care about the things you care about,
Yeah.
and it's not all about them. Again,
Right.
those are the things that we talked about. Okay, so again, I'm going to put links to be able to, probably links to go to a PDF that you can download and get these lists off of. So to wrap it up, there's a little bit of an exercise you want folks to do. Tell them what it is, and then we'll gather some final thoughts.
Yeah, if anybody is interested in looking at the impact of how unsafe people have really distorted your 4 key relationships, your relationship with God, your relationship with your true self, your relationship with others, and your relationship with what we call creation, which can be vocation, your calling, all of those things would go into creation. Key relationships are what start to define those things for you. And so to understand, when you've treated somebody as safe, who really has characteristics of unsafe, it's really good if you can go through, put your list of people who are, you viewed to be safe people, who later you learned were not safe, and go through the list, of safe characteristics and point out the ones that they had, the ones that they did not have. You can go over to the unsafe list and look at some of the things that they did have. And what happens if you do this with enough people, you're going to find patterns of probably what was ingrained in you. Some of those patterns, like I talked about, that just were operational in how I viewed people. And when you do that, and the more you start to define what a safe person looks like, you start to trust yourself again, that you're able to pick people out and not get hurt. Doesn't mean you won't ever get hurt, but it's a lot safer way. I think, there are many things that we are just not taught in school growing up, like how to balance a checkbook. But even in the church today, like somebody just teaching you, what does a safe person look like? And so we don't learn them. And so we just go with what we know. And it can really be create a deficit in our relationship with God. It's amazing to see how we feel about God if we've not ever had safe people in our life. But then our relationship with ourselves and relationship with others, you just can see huge impact. And so it's just a helpful exercise to understand your kind of go-to and then be able to pray into that, to ask God to help you start to change some of those patterns and to bring healthier people into your life. Most importantly, it starts your journey of healing to become a safe person. Because if we are going to become safe in the church body, I'm not talking about a building, I'm talking about a people group, then we need safe people for us, which means we need to learn to become one. So the first step is always using all of that to say, how has this impacted me? Why did I accept this behavior? And you'll start to see patterns generally back from your upbringing that God will start to teach you where it's coming from, and you can surrender to healing in that area.
Okay. Well, that's great advice for anyone now listening. Probably one of the most important parts of what Colleen just said is that you pray into it. So you need to take your quiet time with the Lord and pray that he will bring these people into your life.
Yeah.
That's an easy prayer that he's going to answer. Yes, absolutely, 100%. He will do it. I know that because I prayed that prayer in a pretty significant time in my life when I moved to an area where I knew almost no one.
Yeah.
And he did that. And he will also assist you in what it's going to take to sort all this out as you meet different folks. But believe that he's going to bring safe people your way.
Yeah.
Count on it. He's a God of love. He's going to do it. So listen, thank you all for joining us this time around. It was great to have the conversation. And what I would love to hear more is from you, what you might want to add to it. So there's places, no matter where you're listening or watching this podcast, you can leave notes, you can email us, you can talk in community about some of the things that you're hearing here. Give us feedback, review it, share it, subscribe wherever you are to get more of this type of thing. We're going to go much deeper into the ministry of embracing brokenness. This, at its core, this is one of the key tenets of what we talk about when we go out in public and we run small groups or seminars or conferences or just one-on-one with people. So thanks for hanging out. Appreciate it. It was great. Blessings to you all. We'll see you again real soon.
Yes.
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.